Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to this session at Rewired on the future of the workplace and what we've learned as a result of COVID-19. My name is Saadia Zahidi. I'm a managing director at the World Economic Forum. We are a partner of Dubai Cares and supporting this brilliant effort around Rewired at this particular meeting, as well as over the coming years. So delighted to be here with you. I'm also delighted to introduce a wonderful panel of leaders in this space and very excited to hear about their views. Let me very quickly run you through the names and organizations of the illustrious cast, and then I'll give you an overview of the session. We're joined today by Barry Lumpkins, Global Director of Leadership and Talent Development at DP World. Hello. So I'll wave from you there. Hi. Sallyann Della Casa, Chief Identity Hacker at GLEAC. And Sallyann, could you very quickly tell us what the organization name stands for?
Absolutely. So it's pronounced GLEAC, geek with a G. Yes, geek with an L, I always say. GLEAC stands for a person who creates their own life path.
Fantastic. Thank you. We're also joined by Blair Sheppard, Global Leader for Strategy and Leadership at PwC. Hello, Blair.
Hello.
Xavier Anglada, Managing Director, Strategy and Consulting Lead, Middle East of Accenture is also here. Hello, Xavier.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having us.
And we have Dr. Regis Chasse, Dean of the Leadership Institute at Majid Futtaim. Hello.
Hello, everyone.
Great to have you here. And finally, last but not least, Asheesh Advani, CEO of JA Worldwide and also a close collaborator with us at the World Economic Forum. Hi, Ashish.
Hi, good to see you, Saadia.
Great. Have I missed anybody? Okay, we have everyone. Fantastic. Great. Thank you so much. We have roughly under an hour to have a fairly complex conversation, and I do hope that it will be more of a conversation. I'm asked to say a few comments up front to frame the issue and to share a bit about the World Economic Forum's work on the future of jobs and what we are learning about both COVID-19 and about the longer term disruptions in the workplace, and I'll get to that in a second, but I'll lay out the key objectives of the meeting and then the flow of the conversation as well. So some of the objectives of the conversation are: one, reflect very much on COVID-19 and this massive disruption that we've all just seen occur, both in the workforce and in education systems, and what that means over the 10 to 11 months that many of us have been now in this situation, even though we start to now see light at the end of the tunnel in 2021. This has been a long, unexpected experiment for workplaces, for workforces, and of course also for learners. So what have we learned? Second, highlight what might be the priority skills that employers are now looking for in current and potential employees, and how this may actually have changed as a result of the pandemic. Third, we want to try to understand how else the pandemic is influencing companies' approaches as to who they want to recruit and how. And then finally, explore what the implications above might tell us about the future of education and what the role the private sector may have in supporting any potential shifts there. And so we should be able to get to those conclusions as well after discussing more about the workplace. I'll share a bit about the workforce and about what we are seeing from our Global Future of Jobs report. I would encourage you to take a look. We released that in October of 2020. And it takes a look both at the pandemic-related timeframe and also looks outward at the next 5 years. And perhaps the first and foremost finding is that we are seeing a double disruption in the workplace. There is, at the same time, a disruption caused by the pandemic and by the recession that has created a further acceleration of the deployment of technologies. And at the same time, there is this longer term shift that was happening anyway, what we define as the fourth industrial revolution, the automation and digitization of multiple tasks, which has become that much easier. And so these two disruptions together are really forcing a new situation for the workplace. In fact, at our Jobs Reset Summit that we've had the pleasure of hosting many of you at, there it became quite clear that for many, the future of work has already arrived. So people are now working from home in a very different way than they would have imagined before. Companies, nearly 89% of them that previously never had any clear plans in place for allowing for remote work, have now adopted remote work. For others, it has meant relegating to the home without access to employment, because for many, their roles are such that they cannot be done unless they're done in person. And for yet others, it has meant staying in the workforce, but with an added risk of a health impact that has not been managed well. And this particularly applies to the informal workforce. So there are many segments of the workplace and workforce, and I would encourage us to think through all of those segments as we have our conversation. A second finding is around the speed with which some of these changes are taking place. And what we found is that companies not looking at today's situation, but when they're asked to look out at the next 5 years until 2025, 84% expected to accelerate digitization, 50% expected to accelerate automation, and 83% were planning to further scale remote work inside their organizations. So some of the changes that we're seeing, they're here to stay. And some of the fourth industrial revolution technologies and the patterns associated with them are likely to be accelerated. Another aspect that we found, and I think that's one of the other key points, is the outlook is still very positive in terms of jobs. So we expected in a certain set of industries and countries that we were able to cover, 97 million new jobs would be created while 85 million would disappear. So certainly the net outlook is positive. But this also points to a slower rate of job creation and a higher rate of job destruction than when we did the same exercise 2 years ago. So 2 years ago, many more jobs were going to be created and less jobs were going to be destroyed. And so we can see that there is a slowdown in the rate of job creation, again, not surprising in the midst of a recession, and an increase in the rate of job destruction. The types of jobs, however, that are disappearing and that are increasing, those have actually remained remarkably consistent. So the set of jobs that are disappearing still tend to be the ones which can be rapidly automated. So data entry clerks, administrative and executive secretaries, accounting and bookkeeping and payroll related functions, accountants and auditors. So all white collar work that has tended to provide good middle class livelihoods. Those are the types of jobs that are disappearing due to automation and digitization, and the types of jobs that are growing. Data analysts and scientists, AI and machine learning specialists, big data specialists, digital marketing and strategy specialists, relatively newer roles that are now growing at rates that are so high that they are the future mass roles rather than simply niche white collar roles. Within those jobs of tomorrow, however, there's no indication that these are only highly technology dependent roles that will grow. There are a large set of growing roles in the green economy. There are a large set of growing roles in the care economy. There are a large set of roles that relate to people and culture. There are a large set of roles that relate to sales and marketing. So these need not necessarily be roles only in data and AI or only in cloud computing. They do actually cut across a number of different sectors and specific job tasks. What has become very clear, though, is that we will need mass reskilling. So 50% of all employees will need to be reskilled by 2025, and that is if you retain your current job. And that is, again, not surprising because we expect that 40% of the core skills in any role will fundamentally shift by 2025. And that's on average. For some jobs, that's going to be only 20%, in other jobs, that's going to be 70%, but on average, 40% of the core skills will shift across most jobs. And I'll come to a close in another just 2 points. One is that there is a clear business case for employers to invest in that reskilling. We found that 2/3 of employers were actually able to see a clear return on investment within 1 year of supporting reskilling and upskilling of their workforce. But for many, in the midst of this pandemic and this academic economic downturn, they are not necessarily investing in some of these longer term returns. They are in fact taking fairly short-term decisions. So that's one major area where better incentives need to be created for employers to in fact retain their workforce and invest in their reskilling and upskilling. And the second point we found is that it is actually relatively easy to do, in the sense that for many, it would only take a couple of months of retraining and reskilling to train somebody from a people and towards a people and culture related role. It would take about 2 to 3 months to train somebody towards a product development role. It would take about 4 to 5 months to train somebody towards a cloud computing and engineering basic role. Now, of course, there's a lot more to be done and people can learn across multiple skill levels, but at a very basic level, in a way that can be deployed across their current job, there are a number of skills that can be picked up relatively fast online. And that is where our sort of final points or findings around the report come in, and that is there is a strong need for public and private collaboration. Businesses on their own, as single individual businesses, will not find a very strong incentive to do this wholly on their own. And they will also find that if they work with other partners, including government, including other businesses, they will be able to provide much greater and a much more efficient reskilling than if they try to do this wholly in-house and wholly on their own. And that would also contribute to a greater societal good, because people will be able to walk away with certifications that are recognized and broadly usable across multiple parts of the workforce, rather than limited to a very specialized role inside a company. And so overall, our findings are that we need to have a lot more public and private collaboration. Thank you for the opportunity to share a bit about the Future of Jobs report and some of our findings. And now we get to the far more exciting part of the agenda, which is actually hearing from the panelists and hearing their views. And we'll try to have 3 parts of the conversation. The first is on the impact of COVID-19 on the workforce and on the workplace, and really trying to understand from everybody as we approach the end of this year, what are some of your views about the key changes that you have implemented within your own organization, or that you're seeing broadly across the different organizations? So I'll turn it over first to Blair on that question, and then we'll hear from everybody. And if you could keep your comments from 1 to 2 minutes, that will allow us to go through the full set of constituents.
So thanks, Saadia. Actually, we were in pretty good shape as it came to sort of taking people and having them work from home, because we had already made that investment. And so that was not a hard one for us. I think the things that we focused on particular through this crisis has been sort of on the employee side and on the client side. So on the employee side, we've worked really hard to ensure they're all taken care of. I mean, it turns out we have, some people who were stuck in a 100 square meter apartment for months at a time, some people whose families were experiencing the COVID crisis. And so we spent a lot of time on ensuring that they were investing in their own development. So at a 1,600% increase in utilization of our electronic assets for learning. We spent a lot of time working on mental health and personal well-being, and we spent a lot of time on making sure that they were situated well so they could actually do the work they needed to do, but navigate the challenges at home. A lot of our people have kids, for example, and so we try to navigate that well. And I think it's really helped us because the level of commitment to the firm has gone up dramatically as a result, and commitment to client. And on the client side, what we're trying to do is actually help think through this issue of how do you repair the damage of COVID, but actually recognize there's a bunch of other stuff coming faster than ever, accelerated in some ways by COVID, that some of which you summarized, and repair and rethink at the same time so they go through a pretty significant transformation. The key issue for us, in the sense, in the first part, was getting our client-facing partners able to have that kind of conversation, sort of discuss the broad-ranging issues in the world and how that's influencing what's going on. And so taking care was the first piece, and then thinking about how we position for the future and was the second piece. And they're both actually, fortunately, going really well.
That's great. Thank you so much. Thanks for sharing that. Let's actually stick with a similar industry. And Xavier, perhaps I can go to you next to share your experiences, both within the region and specific to your organization.
Very good. Thanks, Saadia. And yes, and I'm going to follow up on what Blair mentioned, right? So Accenture is a over 500,000 people company, professional services focused on, and we support a lot of the largest clients in a way. Let me put an example that was very critical during COVID times, NHS. This is a client that required business continuity profoundly. So while we needed to, on our side, protect our people and make sure that they could work from home and could provide the business continuity, on the other side, there should be almost no impact into what we were offering to the client, right? So our big effort was, let's protect our people first, while we smoothly transition all the workloads in remote working. And remember, for instance, we're some of the largest BPO services we have in India. People were working in same offices, same spaces, and we had to bring all the equipment back homes and make them continue to work. And that in itself was enabled because the company a few years ago decided to go fully on the cloud. And this is one of the things that materially have separated the winners versus the one that were behind on this process. The technology adoption, so cloud, security, and digitization at the core, right? And we were doing it ourselves, and we were helping clients to do it. And we've seen these days this accelerating. And concrete things we were doing in the region. For instance, in Expo 2020, we're doing the hour of code. We were teaching coding to students, and we were doing on-site in Expo. So we gave continuity, and we continued to do it remotely. We created virtual classrooms. We made sure that the experience of Expo and the experience of coding learning continue to happen, right? And just to put some of examples, or even our global, the maybe most signature program of education of future managing directors of Accenture, call it LDP, Leadership Development Program. This is a physically, typically run program. And this year we had to do it fully digital. And as well, it reinforced all our push to reinvent what we're doing at the core in no time. And I think this is where we stretched our brains and our capabilities, and proof has done that I think a lot of things will never come back to the previous, because a lot of the processes we were doing on physically now will continue online in the future.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's head over to two very different industries. So Barry, if I could go to you next, and if you could share the experience at DP World.
Sure, Saadia, thank you. And it's great to be here with the other panelists. So I think for me, so I should say one thing. I mean, I started in DP World in March. So the only DP World that I've known has been during the pandemic. So it's been a great learning experience. I will say two things that really jumped out the first one was very opportunistic, and that was around at large scale globally building connectivity of our people. And that's largely because over the last 5 to 10 years, DP World has grown exponentially, largely by acquisition. And so this was a great opportunity to build all sorts of channels, forums, and different opportunities to connect people who never, different business units, et cetera, who had never had communication with their global colleagues on the other side of the globe. So that's been a huge success that continues to build momentum. And really the other piece is just around doubling down on our people. And I've told many people, other people in my network, that DP World is the most people-centric organization I've ever joined. And so it was already front and center, our people, but we have really doubled down, and it's been largely a pull effect, first of all, around the culture of learning. I mean, our global flagship programs around functional executive development and leadership development, we've actually delivered 40% more globally than we did in 2019. And we still haven't met the appetite in the business. And I think that's just, it's been extraordinary to watch this kind of pull effect. And then the other sides, of course, as I'm sure the other panelists will agree, is around looking at well-being very holistically. Everything from psychological to all the way to financial well-being. And one particular group that we're focusing a lot on right now is our working parents. We really feel like that's a group that is facing very unique challenges, and as alternative educational setups continue around the globe, we feel like, you know, creating different frameworks to support working parents is really important going forward.
That's great, thank you. And we'll talk a bit more about, you know, what more can be done in terms of that type of support. Let me turn it over to Regis. And Regis, if you could share the experience in your organization, and then I'll bring it over to Sallyann and to Asheesh, less so from their perspective broadly on education, but actually the organizational perspective, and then we'll come to the education and skills related questions later. Regis, please go ahead.
Thank you, Saadia. So Majid Futtaim is primarily in the retail business, and so there were two driving forces that really made us adapt to the COVID-19 situation. First, a set of customer behavior changes, and there, of course, for those people, for those customers that were still coming to our stores, we needed absolutely to make sure that it was safe, first and foremost, and also that we were keeping the trust with those customers. So when you go grocery shopping, you have no choice often but to go to the store. So we needed to make sure that we preserve that as much as possible and in a safe way. The other aspect of customer behavior change was, of course, online buying. And for us as Majid Futtaim, that journey of online buying started only quite recently, maybe 3 years ago. So we have really tripled down on analytics, on digital capabilities. Really, the only expansion that we had in terms of hiring was really to make sure that we were able to provide online ordering, scaling that up, that we could accelerate the opening of fulfillment centers, that we had new offerings sometimes like click and collect, for instance. So that was really on the dimension of acknowledging that COVID-19 had an impact on our customers, and we were adapting the way we were supporting them. But then, of course, on our employee and the environment that suddenly our employees were forced to work in. Of course, we had our frontline workers, and they are in stores, and we need to protect their safety absolutely. And for the office workers, this was absolutely a significant change. Everybody within Majid Futtaim in the headquarters was coming to the office to work every day, and suddenly, overnight, we had 6,000 of our colleagues that were forced to work from home. That was a very significant change for our office workers. So we've put in place support, lots of support in terms of helpline, thinking about the well-being and mental health. We've put in place a helpline. We've put in place also internal support networks, such as MAFers support MAFers. We've put in place also flexible work policies to make sure that people feel comfortable working from home and are provided with all the support that the organization can give them in terms of connectivity and all those things. And then we also talking about education and being leading the Leadership Institute, we absolutely shifted completely our delivery model from being in 2019, 96% of our activities was in class. 96% of activities was in class on campus, and starting from April to now, 100% of our activity has been online. So it has required a reinvention of ourselves to develop new skills and also offer to our employees this online learning, where initially there was appetite for things that would help our employees immediately. For instance, how to manage a virtual team, how to run effective meeting via Zoom, but also there was a bit of reluctance for those programs that were historically journeys, long leadership development journeys, where we had to transform them into digital format, and there we had to learn.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Really fascinating to hear all of the experiences from these big employers. Perhaps I can turn it over now to Asheesh and Sallyann. And Sallyann, I'll ask you to go first and share experiences from your own organizations and how you manage the disruption to your workforce. Sallyann?
Absolutely. So I'm going to talk not only from the perspective of my organization, but certainly in terms of the clients that we work with and we manage this entire disruption for them. So for us, what we look at is the human in all of this, and we look at human behavioral drivers, and that shifted completely during this time. So if you look at the taxonomy of what makes a job role, let's take a typical role like a salesperson. Pre-COVID, in a process-driven company, so an example would be one of our clients, Prada USA. You would find the traditional behavioral drivers in those roles. Thinking on your feet, extroversion, communication, persuasion skills. During COVID, we were able to track how behaviors shifted for some of the largest players in the world in these roles. So by the time COVID, around May or June, a company like Prada, the top performers in that organization now were the behaviors driving performance was time management, entrepreneurial abilities. So to be able to look at how much job roles in their forms, the architecture of a job, both hard and soft skills, changed during this time for us, not only internally for us as a tech company, but externally for the clients that we service, has been really incredible. That now we can identify for companies what that new role, what does customer success role look like now, what all these taxonomies look like, and this is the step before the learning and development happens, right? So this is the work that needs to happen before we move online or we decide what we're going to upskill people in. We need to know what are the drivers that's driving performance, certainly in companies, our top tails and what's making up our bottom tails. And that completely shifted in the last 6 months. So, it's been an exciting time for us, I have to say, really exciting time. Asheesh, you can go ahead.
Thanks. I think, so to mirror what everybody has said, the transformation has both positives and negatives. On the positive side, I think our staff has been able to sort of embrace the new format of communication. And we've got teams all over the world. So we operate in 115 countries, and we're really a network of teams because they're all independent legal entities. And the network, I would say, because of the frequency of video calls, not only occasionally does Zoom fatigue sort of set in, but the way we communicate has really changed with our partners and with ourselves. So for example, on the positive side, normally if we do a project, we've a great partnership with Accenture, for example, with a number of countries who participate in the project. Normally we'd have to get on a plane and try to get the folks from perhaps the most resource constrained countries. We'd have to find a way to pay for their flights. Now as a nonprofit, we don't need to do that. And the ability for people to connect using video has really changed the inclusivity of who gets to be in the room for some of these conversations. So that's the positive. More than I've seen before, people who normally wouldn't be able to get on a plane to fly somewhere are part of project design, which matters so much, as you all know. Co-creation is how things actually happen. On the negative, I will say the volume of calls and the volume of meetings has increased so much for my colleagues around the world that I do believe there's some mental health implications to how this impacts their daily lives. And I don't think we've fully come up with solutions for this. I think we've talked about solutions, but I don't know if it's actually creating a real solution for the very real problems our teams have. I'll also say that on the positive side, the ability for us to do town halls and reach people who normally would never be reachable has really increased. And that has led to much more collaboration and cooperation amongst our stakeholders around the world. And in a world where we have more national interests which are settling in, the need for more communication amongst people in different cultures and communities matters a lot. So town halls actually is an investment worth making, at least for our organization.
Thank you very much. So I think that in the first half an hour of this conversation, we've spent quite a bit of time thinking about the longer term disruptions that are happening to the workforce, as well as the shorter term disruptions that the pandemic has brought about. And I think underlying everything that all of the speakers have shared, there are, of course, a lot of challenges, and many organizations and workers themselves had to make a lot of shifts far more rapidly than they could have ever imagined. At the same time, I think you've all pointed to opportunities that arose, a bigger reach than we were able to have before, for people to become more comfortable with online learning, not just online working. And so there are some hidden wins, if you will. And of course, the real sort of balance will come from keeping some of the learnings, keeping some of the opportunities that arose as we start looking towards the future and having more of a hybrid approach to the office and to the workplace. So we've got about half an hour left for the next two parts of the conversation. And I would just ask that we go very rapidly around, or perhaps I'll just shorten a bit some of the panel conversations. One part of the conversation that I think we do all want to have and that we're keen to have is, what are the skills that are actually going to be required in the future? So again, from the messages that we had from the Future of Jobs report, which is basically serving multiple heads of HR around the world, their sense was, yes, absolutely, we need some ability to work with technology, but the skills that rise to the very top, the top 10 skills, are incredibly human traits. They are about collaboration, they're about creativity, they're about active listening, they're about being able to work with others. And that is not necessarily the message that you get when you think about technology disruptions. And so how do some of these soft skills, if you will, how do some of these skills get imparted? And what are some of the trends that you've observed in this space? Is this natural? Is this happening anyway? Or is this something that we need to take a very deliberate and proactive approach to? And let me turn it over first to Sallyann, and then I'll come back around to the rest of the group.
So I will start by saying that, you know, a job, how I look at a job, is like a house. And in a house, it has walls, and those are the hard skills, and all the space in the house are the human skills or soft skills. And if I look very simply at, you know, the World Economic Forum report recently that came out, 8 out of the 10 skills on there are human skills. If I look at any report that's out there anywhere in the world, it's either 8 out of 9 skills, whether it's Google Project Oxygen, and there's a reason for that. Think about a house and the space within the house. That's where we interact. That's where we spend most of our time. That's where we thrive. And most jobs are people facing. You know, 85% of job success comes from human skills. You know, we've known that. I think COVID has really shown the light on that, and now has forced corporates and everyone to address that issue. And you know, the way that we do it at GLEAC is we created an algorithm and the first measure on human skills. So what we try to do is to be able to say, there's a concrete way for you as an organization to look at that architecture of a job, figure out the right combinations and the right, the right amounts in the recipe that is needed for your company, geography, culture, context, what might apply in one country might not apply in the other country, but there are the tools now, there are taxonomies now, there are many open skills taxonomies that's out there, many upcoming out there. They're readily available for you to tag your learning, tag your jobs, tag your learning, make your learning interoperable. So this transition can happen in terms of jobs. Another thing I want to address very, very quick, and then I will have you go on, is, you know, in terms of jobs disappearing and jobs coming up. So take the example of an accountant. You know, a job that is in scarcity right now in the US is a cybercrime analyst. Well, the best person for that job are actually bookkeepers and accountants. And it's the human skills in that problem solving that makes them the best equipped for that job. So many of the disappearing and emerging jobs, the common link are going to be the human skills. And once you can measure learning agility, you can learn, anyone can learn the hard skills, right? It's the human skills that make the difference. So I'll end there. Saadia.
All right, thank you very much. So Very much the human skills that are going to make the difference. Barry, could I turn it over to you for your views?
Yes, and for me, there's one thing that's really jumped out, and I'll keep it a little bit more broad and general. And for me, it's been all about leadership. And those of us that work with leadership, have worked with leadership quite extensively, know that, you know, over the past 10 to 15 years, this whole command and control or micromanagement style of leadership was already in decline. And I like to say it was an endangered species, but COVID killed it. It's extinct now. It really has no place for the future. The future of leadership is all about trust, empowerment, and ownership. And I think for me, that's the big thing that's jumped out over the last 9 months.
Great, thank you. Regis, what about your view? I mean, as the Dean of Philippines, are you nodding and agreeing?
Yes, I absolutely concur with Barry. For us, leadership skills were really those skills that made a difference. We're talking about more empathy, we're talking about more authentic leadership. We did not know the answer, right? We did not know how to deal with this up front. We didn't have the blue book or the rule book to deal with that situation. And to have leaders at any level of the organization acknowledging that we need to come up with a solution together was very empowering for our employees, and I don't see how we can come back from there other than continuing building that type of relationship with between the leaders and the employees. Collaboration, that's very fascinating how COVID has forced us to be all on deck. It flattened the organization. People who were able to contribute to finding the right solution for a specific problem, whether they were in a hierarchy or not, came together regardless of business units, regardless of roles, regardless of geographies, and that for us was a big win, big win. And then the last dimension of leadership that was exacerbated through this period for us is what I call agile leadership. You know, dare to try a new solution. If you fail fast, learn from it, but keep experimenting and driving towards the solution. And that also for us was quite eye-opening. Just one more word. There is the leadership dimension, but also there is management capabilities that we had to work on a little bit. And for instance, you know, managing from watching your employees being from 8 to 5, you know, in the office versus managing through outcomes is also something that we have shifted towards and that we want to keep for the future. So these type of skills, I think, will stick around.
That's great. Thank you so much. Asheesh, for an organization that is such a leader in helping young people have the right kinds of skills, what shifts did you see within your internal workforce in terms of the skills that are required, and how, if at all, is the advice to younger people changing?
Thanks, Saadia. So I'll give you an example to make it very visual. We normally do events that bring young people together in person. And they're very big events all over the world. For example, in the Middle East, we have an event which is part of our affiliate in Chasse. And all these events have had to pivot to be virtual. And some leaders pivoted it to feel very like virtual reality, where young people come with an avatar and they interact with other young people's avatars, and they actually build relationships on social media. And other leaders effectively made it a large Zoom call. And both of those have valid outcomes. To actually measure the outcomes on changing young people's mindset, which is what we typically do after an in-person event, is a new art, right? How do you actually assess whether the whole experience was worth it from an outcomes perspective? So one new skill set is really knowing how to measure outcomes of using new technologies. And I do worry in the world, Saadia, that there's such a rapid embrace of new digital technologies that are not only leaving people behind who aren't necessarily have the broadband access or even the utility of using them, but also we aren't yet able to know the outcomes of these new types of learning. I'm an optimist, and I believe that over time, the outcomes could actually be better. But during this transition phase, I think our leaders have had to really learn new skills, not only how to deliver these experiences, which we're all learning, but also how to measure their effectiveness on the youth that we serve.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Ashish. I think a lot of food for thought there, and also an important and note of caution. We're also seeing a bit of that note of caution coming through in one of the questions. How do we balance user and employee privacy versus the rapid increase in surveillance by employers who are worried about productivity and data integrity and cybersecurity? So let me turn it over to Blair and to Xavier on this question. So, you know, not just within your own workforce, but as people whose organizations are then helping advise so many other employers, what are your thoughts there? And Blair, I'll go to you first and then come to Xavier next.
Yeah, so I think in a sense, the thing we have to recognize is really where Asheesh ended, which is that with this massive move to interacting through technology, there's a whole host of things that are unintended consequences that we have to understand, discern, and deal with really quickly, right? And so part of it has to do with invasion of privacy and how we manage that. Part of it has to do with security of information. I think actually that one we kind of have answers to, except the people who are trying to get at it are just getting more and more clever. So we have to stay ahead of them. I think there's some subtler pieces that are really important related to things like what are the ways in which by engaging through technology, we sort of change the nature of the social system. So for example, we were already getting pretty parochial in the world. I think that in some ways this accentuates that because you don't see people where they live in the same way. So what do you do to mitigate that? In a sense, we were isolating people. So what's interesting is that if you look in education, the kids who actually are introverts are thriving, but the kids actually that are extroverts are really having trouble because they don't have the people interacting with. And so there are these unintended consequences that we need to understand and have an impact on. So if I come back to the thinking about that question from a soft skills perspective, the real challenge is to essentially manage things that are inherently paradoxical. So let me give you two examples of what I mean, both at the individual level and the leadership level, right? So one of them is, how do we dramatically increase our technical sophistication, but at the same time, understand human systems, human beings, and the ways people are reacting to them better? The problem we have is that most people who are really good at technology probably didn't study psychology, sociology, political science in school and haven't really spent much time thinking about it. So they're building systems without sufficient reflectivity on the impact it's having on human beings and human systems. And you have people who really deeply understand human beings and human systems, but they don't actually understand technology. And the danger there is they're increasingly irrelevant. And so we have to, in a sense, find a way in more and more people to glom together two things that feel inherently contradictory, which is be deeply technically capable and be really great at human systems. Another example is you think about the response to COVID. The leaders who dealt with COVID really well engaged in another kind of paradoxical characteristic, which is they recognized they didn't know much and sought massive input from all sorts of different expertise. And when they did that, they knew they didn't have the answer, right? And so, but they had the courage to actually take a step because no decision was worse than an imperfect decision. And realizing they were going to get significant criticism for whatever step they took, but they had the courage to do it. And then they were humble enough again to admit they didn't know whether it was working. And so they tried to find the sorts of assessment devices that Asheesh was referring to see how we were doing mid-course so they could make the correction. So massive humility and massive heroism in the same person. Now, it turns out we need that across the spectrum from people at all levels of work. And so I think, in a sense, what we have to do is recognize that the nature of the human requirement post-COVID in the 21st century is dramatically different. And at the heart of it requires putting things together that feel contradictory. And so just your question highlights that, Saadia, which is, what is the human side? Why is the human side so important in a increasingly technological world? The answer is, it's kind of an obvious paradox, right? We've sort of identified 6 of those that we think are relevant, and we think everyone has to entertain those. And if we do, and we do them well, then the sorts of unintended consequences of the kind that were described in that question are less likely to happen because we'll anticipate them in the first instance, or we'll manage them more effectively as they occur. And so I think there's kind of a soft skill, or at least a merge skill capability that's necessary for dealing with the kinds of concerns that were expressed in that question.
Excellent. Thank you so much. That was very, very helpful. Xavier, I'll turn it over to you for a final comment in this space, this balance between human and technology, and perhaps this balance with some of the darker sides of the technologies that are deployed. Please go ahead.
Yes, so there's no doubt, and no one will question that we are in an AI-driven economy. Artificial intelligence is pervasively affecting every dimension of our work, our lives, and so on. And we interact completely every day in every moment, right? And we're not going to change that. Then for this, from the corporate side, we're seeing more and more the need to have an implementation of AI with a responsible, with an ethical mindset, right? And people is seeing through COVID even that proper data and analytics applied AI and ML really can save lives, because it can tell what to do, what not to do, where to go, where not to go. So there's a lot about benefits from the technology, but it needs to be properly identified, managed, and governed. So the CHRO will no longer be a people lead, but will be as well a robot lead. You will need to identify the, let's say, the explainability of the decision of the bots that will run certain parts of the decisions in the company, right? And such is the case that we ourselves are seeing more and more. And to your earlier question, Saadia, around what is the deliberate investment that companies need to do, or maybe not, about the reskilling, definitely there needs to be profound of that, because we're seeing a lot of roles and even the tasks underneath that will be automated. This will displace Nestle jobs, but there's going to be a lot of the roles that will be augmented, a human plus a machine collaborating to get a sharper and a faster output, right? Take loan officers in banks and so on. Now, before was everything manual. Today, it's much faster, and there can be a joint decision. And then there will be new types of roles. And to put an example of new types of roles, we're seeing a lot of people that were doing, for instance, loan officers before in the back office of a bank, being now trainers of bots that do loan assessment. So there's complete new types of roles being reinvented, hence the opportunity and your assessment that there's going to be a delta, a positive delta in terms of new jobs created. Indeed. The reality though, and this is where the tricky part happens, is a lot of workers don't have the skills to be able to be there. And so companies and governments need to fundamentally invest into breaking those gaps of skills, to bring those closer to the reskilled workforce that will be able to lead these new type of jobs, right?
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you. There is a fascinating question from Stephanie Goldberg about the innovative product or solution that you never could have imagined pre-COVID, and that has now been successfully developed and implemented as a result of the pandemic. I'm going to make that sort of the extra that we're going to try to leave just a couple of minutes for at the very end. I think that's an interesting, positive note to end on. And so just wanted to acknowledge that, Stephanie, we've heard your question, but let me bring this to one very important piece of our pre-planned agenda, which is around education and the future workforce. So we've just discussed everything that's happening to the current workforce. We've talked a bit about what does this mean for sort of future trends, future reskilling, upskilling, but we've remained very much in the realm of what the role of employers is in relation to their current workforce. What about that pipeline of future workers? We've also seen a massive disruption in education, and I know that a lot of those conversations are being dealt with elsewhere. But what would your views be, either the trends that you're observing from private sector employers, or as some of those employers yourselves, what do you think needs to change in terms of the future of education? What would be the big step change that we should now aim for? And two, how would the private sector contribute? And we'll just need to do this incredibly rapidly. And I'll start with Regis here first. Please go ahead. You unmuted yourself.
Thank you, Saadia. So I really think employers today, when we hire new graduates, do invest. do invest in onboarding those new graduates, but do invest also in bringing up the skills that that as an employer we need for people to be able to perform their tasks. And I really think that we must have much more collaboration between the employers and academia in defining a curriculum together that matches what the employers need, so that we can in turn hire those graduates. Two leads. Number one, I think internships early on, from the first years of bachelor up to the last years of masters and beyond, internships are infinitely valuable. And if you look at Germany, for instance, or other countries that have that embedded into their system, the dynamics between the new graduates and employers are quite different than for instance, in the US or other territories. So that's one aspect. And then the second lead, and you alluded to that in your introduction, I'm very fond of professional certifications to complement academic knowledge and programs, because from an employer standpoint, the fact that those certifications have a shelf life, the fact that, so meaning that after a year or 2 or 3, those certifications become invalid. Therefore, the people who have those certifications have the latest skills in this specific field. And if you combine that with, for instance, associate degree or bachelor degree, and you bring the critical thinking and all what higher ed is good at, additional to skills that are very, very specific to a specific role, but it can be technology, it can be in HR, it can be in supply chain. So those certifications are, for me, sometimes a better predictor of performance of the new graduate than the diploma itself.
Thank you. Barry, could I go to you next, please? Your views on the question around it.
Sure, Saadia. Just a quick view. This is more in terms of a trend, and while it's not new, I see it becoming bigger and scaling much bigger. And that is, and I've experimented with this, and I'm sure some of you have, in terms of maybe some of your formal development programs you have in your company. Maybe it's around high potentials, but where you partner with, let's say, startups in emerging markets. Maybe they have a relationship that's connected with your customer ecosystem or your supplier ecosystem, that's very CSR related. But what I see happening now, and I'm saying this because I'm actually part of a cross company coalition on a volunteer basis that's actually looking at building this, where we create a setup where big multinationals, they actually identify, it either could be a group of startups, it could be a specific emerging market, where you actually take all of your learning content that you have produced yourself and you make it available for free to a certain population who can't afford it otherwise. And I think there's something in this idea around kind of like paying it forward, you know, offering all of the learning that we have internally to different segments who wouldn't have access to it otherwise. And that's something I'm actually working with right now, looking at.
That's great. Thank you. Sallyann, your views?
Yes. So 3 very quick points. One, I believe in bridge building, and there needs to be bridge building between education and corporates. And there is a simple way to do it. Students should be able to today. We have companies like MZ Burning Glass with a lot of labor statistics. You should be able to take a course. When you sign up for a course, you actually should be able to explode that course into what that plays into existing job roles, how many of them are out there in the world, what people are making, and what are you missing. And you should know that from day one when you're entering into university. I think universities need to get very tied to what the labor market is doing. So that's one. Number 2, I think companies need to get very aligned with architecture of job roles and what they need. A lot of times, a lot of the issues are happening because of wrong people in the wrong roles, not knowing the architecture of a job. And I think if that bridge is built and there different on-ramps are provided, both from the employer and the education level, we can solve this issue, but neither independently can solve it on their own. There has to be bridge building.
Great, thank you. Blair, over to you next, please.
Yeah, let me use the lexicon I gave earlier, which is repair, rethink, reconfigure. So there are two massive repair issues. The first is universities have to recover from the fiscal damage that was done to them. That will be really hard because it was massive for them, hundreds of millions of dollars for some institutions. The second one is they have to repair the inaccessibility for those who aren't well off. We've actually, what's happened is education has exacerbated disparity. It's got to fix that problem. So those are two, and they're huge. There are sort of four rethink issues. One of them is they have to get less expensive. They've gotten prohibitively expensive and therefore inaccessible to a lot of people. And actually they've lost the innovation as a result. They've got to get way faster at adjusting the curriculum because the world's moving faster. An example, we have a lot of people who can tell us what's wrong with climate. We have very few people who can help us fix it. And we need it immediately, right? We need certain kinds of technology immediately. So repair the curriculum, change the rate of the curriculum. Third is accelerate the availability across the lifespan, because when people are losing jobs in their 50s, they need to be retooled and brought back to work. And so think about across the entire course of life, including people who retire and want to do something different. And then the final one is actually rethink the core assumptions that cause the problems the world's now grappling with at the heart of what they do. And if you say, so what's the role of business? I think we serve a role in all four of those things. Help them get more efficient and therefore less expensive, link to them so that we ensure that we have the curricula we need related to the point just made, ensure that they actually help us deal with people who are losing work at later stages and actually managing the bridge. And the final one is drive a rethink of the core ideas so that actually they're adapted 21st century. I just described a mouthful and we don't have much time, and I'm really worried about this one.
Thank you very much. I think that sense of urgency is very justified. Xavier, could I go to you next? And then Asheesh, I'm going to give you the final word.
Yes. So there's a clear why we need to do it, because we need a massive reskilling at scale across levels, income, gender, and so on. And I think we have a great opportunity because digitization has created, and COVID has accelerated the boom of EdTech, right? And there were different panels today talking about that. So there's no doubt that same what happened in 2008 with fintechs that helped stepping into the banking that was in a meltdown situation. So EdTech is really the opportunity we have and will bring the cost to serve significantly at a different level. Now, second point that is very relevant is the type of skills will be needed is not only the soft skills parts, but the combination of the STEM skills, more the technical skills, together with the others blended. We need people with a combination of both, and apprenticeships, models, structure from government. And I think that's another big learning from what we've seen in some countries, Singapore, France, US as well, have some very, very relevant apprenticeship programs. Then to get it right, ecosystem play is absolutely fundamental. So government, private sector, and academia needs to work. And the reality today, are we ready for this? Not fully. Take academia, the studies. So to get an approval of a program may take a few years in a country. And I was talking to Salim Ismail, the founder, one of the founders of the Singularity University. He was telling me, look, I change my program every 3 to 6 months, but the approval of the program would take 2-3 years to get it right, formalized as a curriculum. So the regulation needs to really step up as well, and regulators needs to accelerate the approvals of this, because the digitization and the new skills are changing faster than the approval processes.
Right. Thank you very much. Asheesh, over to you for the final words and probably the wrap up of the session.
I'll try my best. You know, everything I've heard today really is very consistent, I think, with how you opened it, Saadia, which is there is a framework which the World Economic Forum has for the future of jobs and the skills that are needed. And almost every comment I heard today at least touched on an element of that framework. I think the last comment from Javi was also about the need for multi-sector and multilateral cooperation amongst business and education, and I'll also throw civil society in there because otherwise we will leave people behind. So I think the need for common language and frameworks, in my mind, after the session just went up. And the good news is we are actually using much of the same language and we actually have many of the same goals. So I continue to have hope and optimism for the future. The urgency though, Saadia, I've got to echo, I think it was Blair who said it, there's real urgency here. So thank you for organizing the session.
That's great. Thank you so much. I will not try to synthesize the very rich and varied conversation we've had, but really emphasize this point around urgency. Let's not waste this crisis and all that it has revealed, and let's ensure that all of the products and innovations and solutions that we now have at our disposal, this is the moment to actually start embedding them. Thank you so much to all of you. Thank you to Barry, to Sallyann, to Blair, to Xavier, to Regis, and to Asheesh. And thank you very much to our hosts for having us today. Good luck with the rest of the meeting. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.